All right, welcome everybody. Today we are sharing a video about our Synod Assembly for 2022 and just giving some of the highlights of what we experienced. Thought it would be good to touch base. If you have never been to the Synod Assembly or don't know, how our polity works as a church, we certainly you probably are familiar with Peace Lutheran Church as the local congregation, but we're also part of the Southwestern Texas Synod, which is about 120 congregations who network together. We have a bishop's office, and many of our bishop staff are actually a part of our congregation. And then beyond that, we're a part of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which is about 4 million people throughout the United States and 65 synods. We are one of those synods, and each year our synod gets together for sort of an annual get together to do some basic stuff of the ministry of the church, much like we would do for our local Peace annual meeting. The synod has one itself. And some things that we do is we approve a budget, we elect leaders, again, same things that we do in the local congregation. We look at the missional outcomes and goals of what we've been aspiring to be as the church together. We learn, we have time of learning, we worship together, a whole host of things over a weekend. And I want to share some of the highlights of that with you now. Here is, back to the top. Here's some of the players that I want to introduce you to. Peace was represented well because the 2022 Synod Assembly in June was hosted in New Braunfels at our Civic Center. So on this screen, you've got, of course, Deacon Andrew as part of a voting member of Peace, and then John Castle, who is on our Synod Council, finishing up his term at this assembly. In addition to John finishing up his term, Mike Stallings was elected as a Synod Council, elected to Synod Council for a 4-year term. So the outgoing Synod Council, John, we say goodbye and well done, and we welcome Mike Stallings as a part of that leadership role. Joining us on the call today in our Zoom chat is Mike and Megan Wenzel. Mike, the silly guy he is, loving his pose there. Mike is and Megan were our voting members from the congregation, and so they got to join us for the weekend and hear all of those wonderful things and then cast their votes and join in the work of the church. And then below that, I wanted to highlight also, of course, I'm in here in this picture. One of the big highlights for me was that I was elected to a ministry position within the Synod. I was elected the chair of the Holy Experiments team, formerly known as the Congregational Vitality team. So for the next 3 years, I'll get to help work with a group of people and really strategize and pray and think about where God is calling us in this new age, in this post-pandemic age, to be the church that God's called us to be in the Synod. In this picture, I'm being installed as well as other ministry chairs. Also, I wanted to highlight our hospitality team. So being that we hosted in New Braunfels, Peace had a major role and impact. We had many disciples from Peace and sharing their time and energy in hospitality. You can see here's a handful of the many volunteers who were there. Grateful for the way that they welcomed those other congregations in our synod at the Civic Center. They did a wonderful job. I think everyone was well fed and happy for the most part for that long weekend.
Amazing food, by the way. Kathy Anderson, thank you for the pies.
Yes, there were many people who asked about what were those fancy pies. Oh, our best kept secret here, Kathy Anderson. She's quite the cook. Also, a shout out to Will Vogus. We had, as I mentioned, a time of worship in our Synod Assembly, a time of prayer. Will made this wonderful prayer loom that was used in each of our worships, and people would offer up their prayers and weave it onto that loom, and we would offer those prayers to the Lord. Very well received, and I think a holy gift as the church and a witness. So thank you, a special thank you to Will and his wonderful craftsmanship and heart for that. I want to give a shout out to Deacon Andrew, and I'll let him speak to this point. The Faith Toolbox for congregations that was created by the Faith Formation team.
Yeah, I serve on the Synod's lifelong faith formation team, and we were given the opportunity throughout Synod Assembly to present different faith moments and experiences for the attendees at Synod Assembly. But we also wanted to give people who attended the assembly something tangible to take back to their congregations and ministries with them. So worked with a couple people in our lifelong faith formation team, and we created a booklet that is kind of what I refer to as like a greatest hits of ideas for faith formation in a variety of approaches, and so we wanted to just have everybody be able to walk out of Synod Assembly with something they could go back and say, hey, this is a great idea, or let's made copies of that for every person who attended Synod Assembly, and that means that they've gone now to every congregation in our Synod and beyond. So pray that that resource will be a blessing to our ministries and our people.
You know, that's really one of the great strengths, I think, of being Synod, that we're not just these isolated churches by ourselves, but that we have a whole host of gifted people and congregations who can come together and use our passions and then share them. So much of our resources, particularly in this post-pandemic world, we've been able to convene and come together and figure things out and offer up those resources. So I just commend that faith formation team and so many others who are working hard and recognizing that we're not having to do this all by ourselves. We have so many people walking together. This year's theme was based on Acts 8, verses 26 through 40. And that is the Bible story of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, in which Philip is being sent out south to meet this stranger along the road. And they have this wonderful mutual encounter and get to share the gospel together. Philip is invited into the Ethiopian's chariot. They read the scripture together. By the end of it, Philip is sort of explaining the scroll of Isaiah and who Jesus is, who this Messiah is. And by the end of it, the eunuch is baptized and Philip is sort of whisked away to the next place. Got good news? Yes, we do. The second part of that theme is go with it. So go share it. That's a part of our learning experience that we get to do as the church together. Y'all want to share anything about how that spoke to you, that theme? Or we spent some time in Bible study and really looking in at that text.
I know for me, it is a good reminder of the fact that as Christians, part of our calling, part of our discipleship is to spread the word. And Philip goes outside of his familiarity and his comfort zone and meets with somebody who is very different in very many ways, and yet in the midst of that intersection, some really holy things take place. I think that both Philip and the eunuch, the gentleman from Ethiopia, I think both of them are incredibly blessed by the encounter. And we were encouraged to think about, what does it look like in our world, in our day and age, in our community? Where are places for us to be able to intersect with the community and people's lives to share that good news and not just keep it to ourselves?
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is just, doing expanding on what we already do as our church home. I mean, we do a lot of outreach in the different community things that we do, such as food bank, and but there's always room for more. Or there's always, you may not know your neighbor, you may not know the new people that come into our church home, and maybe they need to have somebody that welcomes them just like we've been welcomed. So I guess it's more about community and making sure everybody has a place where they feel like they belong. So I guess that's what I got out of it.
Yeah. I like the intentionality of sort of moving to places that we wouldn't naturally go to, Philip probably wouldn't have found himself on that southern road and gone up to someone so different, someone who was so far removed from what he would have grown up and thought of as an insider in the church. And yet God brought them together and the kingdom was expanded. So as we move into a different world, I think it's going to take more of that spirit-led, in those nudges to get out of those comfort zones and to, meet people who are different and to be bold and consequential in our faith and okay to talk about it, not compartmentalized as it's over here, but a part of our daily life and our daily witness as we have encounters with the other.
I know personally, I find it very easy to get in a set rhythm. Just get up, go to work, come home, do my church time on Sundays, take a good quality nap. That's important. And it's easy to feel good about oneself. Okay, well, I give to the church and I try to take part in certain things that are offered there. But part of what I took from this was, from this whole experience was, there are people in our community, in our state, in our synod that need help. And they are people in populations that maybe the Lutheran Church hasn't really reached as well as it has other populations. And while I personally like to give myself a pat on the back because I feel like I'm a decent person, nobody's perfect and I'm far from it. And there's a lot of slack to pick up. And it's very important that we, like Pastor Jake said at the assembly, it's a confession of faith that was part of what was talked about. I'm personally confessing, and we as a church confess that we have not been able to love our neighbors as ourselves. And that's something that we all say every Sunday, but where the rubber meets the road, let's put some action behind those words and really go out and try to help these people. And even if you can't do it in person, by prayers and projects and funding and things like that, maybe we can affect the lives of people that we'll never even know.
Yeah, well said, Mike. Well said. Which kind of segues into the guest speaker that we had each year at the assembly. We pull in someone. Part of it is to learn as a synod, to know that we have much to learn and to grow in. And so we had Pastor Kelly Chapman from let me look up his official organization here. Pastor Kelly Chapman from the Center for Leadership and Neighborhood Engagement come and give 3 keynotes to us. And, he has a wealth of experience and knowledge as a parish pastor, serving in so many different locations. But I think his main points, what spoke out to me, is he was talking about outreach. He was talking about neighborliness. There was a couple of times I really liked when he said, he had been to all these places and kind of risen in the ranks and had all the experience. And he found himself in this little small congregation of about, 30 people on a Sunday. And we tend to, measure things like that, right? Bigger is better and small isn't as good. And he was feeling that way at some point. And he was looking out at that 30 people in worship and thinking to himself, internally, man, have I plateaued, or why am I, should I be using my gifts in a bigger way? And it dawned on him that he was thinking in that mindset of, I'm thinking I'm a pastor to just these 30 people here. But the truth of the matter is, I'm a pastor to this whole town of 4,000 people. And I appreciated that switch in terms of who we're called, who's in our orbit of influence, and who God calls us to share and minister with, whether or not people are ever part of a traditional church in that sense. We have more people that God places in our lives than we realize. And he said this other thing that resonated, that the average church has about 6 in 10 people who will come, through the doors and, that sort of thing, who are never members per se, and yet are somehow stakeholders or somehow neighbors in the midst of it all, which means the majority of people that God places in our lives aren't, just the ones that we're familiar with. The majority is we're able to be neighborly, and God says, love your neighbor, not make members here. We're able to be neighbors to the vast majority of people, and to just simply, we don't have to make it rocket science in that sense. But I think changing that whole mindset of who are we called to minister to? Are we a church of just who's right in front of us, or is that neighborhood expanded somehow? That opens up new pathways and doorways to actually be the church. I think God calls us in a much bigger, impactful way.
I really quick wanted to share also, so we got to do different groups, different sessions for the assembly. There were multiple different ones. I think one that I liked because it, you could do something in it where you got to spend time making your own loom or your own knitting project. But they talked about each person has different gifts, and you can have your own gift and present it as such. So I feel like do a lot, everybody has their own gifts, and so using them for the greater good. Like, I may not be a professional quilter, but we have some amazing quilters, and we do a lot of good with that service. I may not be an amazing little loomer thing, but maybe I can make a prayer cloth, and maybe we can utilize that for somebody. But each person has their own art form, and I think that that's one of the coolest things that you can bring to the table. It's not just about, it's just the presence of being there, and what you can bring to the table and help others with. So I thought that was cool. So anyway, I want to share.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. We did go to some workshops. That's part of that learning opportunities, where we broke up from the plenary sessions and then go out and have some intentional learning. Deacon Andrew or Mike, anything to share from those? Or from the guests?
Yeah.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
One of them was how to have difficult conversations within our communities in the midst of a very divisive kind of culture that we're finding ourselves in a lot of different ways. And what was amazing is that I walked into that workshop and there wasn't a seat left, and people were standing in the aisles and sitting on the floor, and they literally exceeded the number of people that the fire marshal had said you can have in this room. So they had to ask some people to leave. It was so well attended, and set up a second session for that in a larger room, which was also then packed. And what that tells me is that, one, we all were pretty able to acknowledge the difficult times that we're living in, but that people really wanted to find a way to have faithful conversations and reach across divides, and as Christians be ambassadors and instruments of reconciliation and modeling healthy communication and good listening and respect for one another, which is just something that just seems to be in shorter and shorter and shorter supply. And it really lifted up to me. I was so heartened by the fact that so many people wanted to be in that workshop, because it means that there are people who say, we want to do something to help heal some of these divisions and have the church be a really powerful part of that. So I was very impressed by that, and the resources that they created for that workshop, which we have access to. So we'll certainly find ways to bring that into peace, and to have some dialogue around that as well.
Yeah, and like Megan was talking about the workshop with the loom, it was interesting. I saw no fewer than 10 people there that I had gone to college with. And one of them was one of the pastors who was leading the arts session with the Loom. And it was what happened that night when we were at home that was kind of interesting. Megan had brought her little cardboard loom home with her, and she sat down with it, got to doing some work on her computer, and Lillian picked it up and started doing it. And just started like whipping these things out. And it was a session or a bonding experience for them, that they got to sit there, and Megan got to show her what she learned, and she got to expand her little artsy self, and it was a nice environment for them. But one of the things that really struck me about this was going back to the keynote speaker. He mentioned the story of how he was sort of duped into going into a church because his friends had told him all the cute girls were in this youth group. And he was a black gentleman or a black little boy, and he goes into this church, and he goes in, and it's a bunch of white people. And he was like, oh man, I'm gonna, get my buddy who told me this. But they welcomed him, and that was his beginning into the Lutheran Church. And he talked in pretty good detail about the difference in cultures and the way they approach worship. And I was raised in the Lutheran Church, where it was the hymns, and everybody tries to sit in the back and try to get out early and beat the Baptist to the Adobe Cafe so you can get a good seat and get home in time to see the Cowboys play. But it showed me I have to realize that's my viewpoint on it. And to be inclusive of other folks, I have to be respectful that they have their own traditions and things that were important to them, and musical traditions that were important to them. And I think that it's good that the church make an outreach to try to get in touch with people of different cultures while still maintaining a good foundation in the church that I grew up in. And I think that our particular congregation has done that. And I think that the statement from the ELCA at the assembly was well received, that different cultures have different traditions of worship and different styles of different ways to connect with one another. And it doesn't do anybody any good to limit it and to sort of cast antithetical to what the church is about. And if we're looking to really put our money where our mouth is, the differences. And I don't know, that was the one thing that I really took away from this, was that it's not a personal attack on me that interest would be put into a different population. It's an example of how I should live and how we as a church can go out and embrace other people that may not be like us here in New Braunfels.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing. You can see that from the workshops, from the speakers, from the text itself of Philip meeting the Ethiopian, someone who was different than like him. And one of the workshops I went to, in addition to the learning how to talk to people who are different in an age of anger, was also evangelism, which is kind of a scary word for Lutherans, although we're part of the evangelical Lutheran Church in America, but we kind of forget that first word. And simply that workshop was just about storytelling. We make evangelism as some kind of crusader, type word or something, but it's just meeting people in a very human, basic way. And there are some human things that connect everybody, right? The commonality that we are all made in the image of God, all holy in God's sight. But also there are differences. We're uniquely made. And so finding those commonalities in talking with people in a non-defensive way, that's one of the big problems we have in our culture today, is that, we've divided up, we're scared of the other, when God actually calls us to do the complete opposite, is to go engage one another and learn and work together and grow together. And in that diversity, have this more wondrous expression of God's creation. So I think that's one of the joys. It's one of the hard things. It's one of the countercultural things that we don't do very well in our society anymore, but it's going to be a bigger lean in as the church to go out, engage folks and share that good news that God is for all people, not for some people, not just for my way of thinking, but to broaden that horizon, to be open to that spirit and to be led by that spirit to connect others, to experience that fullness of God's grace and reconciliation. So I appreciate those words and those learning opportunities, and I think we have a long road, but we also have a bright future. I will say that the Synod is leaning into this. They made that abundantly clear. Our Synod leader, I say they, we are the Synod, but our Synod leaders, our bishop staff, and then our congregations at large are leaning into this idea of engaging the other. So you'll see many of the resources, particularly in new mission starts, are planting multicultural places, LGBTQ. There's a new ministry emerging there, an apostolic network in South Texas, looking at Hispanic ministry, and just raising up what we might think is non-traditional leaders or congregations. But it's a bright future because much of that has been untapped. And as our speaker mentioned, we need to look differently and not just see what's right in front of us, but the whole horizon in which God calls us to witness to. It's a bright future in what I see. Well, we could go on, and I will share with you that if you want to know more about some of the specifics of the initiatives and what's happening in the life of the Synod Assembly, all of the reports are on the webpage. You can go to swsynod.org, and there's a Synod Assembly page if you just go to the Assembly button. And it's all documented on here, and these reports, you can take a deeper dive, probably more information on here than you can possibly want to get into. And yet some of this stuff is really good, from our worship material, our Bible studies, our faith toolbox, to budgets and some of the learning and elected leaders. So again, I draw you to that if you'd like a deeper dive. If you'd like to talk to me or Deacon Andrew or Megan and Mike Wenzel, I'm sure we're available just to share our thoughts and continue to do this work together. It's an honor and always a privilege to be able to be church together and recognize God's building something bigger than just us. Any closing thoughts from my colleagues in ministry?
The closing worship on Sunday was just one of the most beautiful worship services. And it really demonstrated that theme of inclusivity and welcome and celebrating diversity and the richness of gifts and the variety of traditions. And boy, if you've never been to a Synod Assembly, you have an opportunity. It really is a powerful experience, and it's not just about reports and business stuff. It's about learning and growing in our faith together as a community, and that really just kind of all came together in that worship service that we had on Sunday. That was just so spirit-filled. You could not walk out of there without feeling incredibly energized and joyful, and what a privilege it is that we have to carry this good news out into the world.
Exactly. And I know Megan and I wanted to thank Pastor Jake and Deacon Andrew and the people of the congregation for the opportunity to go and attend one of these. I've never been to one. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of learning. And we just really appreciate the opportunity to get to take part in that. So thank you all.
Well, thank you all for your hearts. And I know sacrificing a weekend, it does take that. But, my hope is that as people hear the story and recognize the work that we do together as the church, the big church is holy and sacred and transformational, that there's just a line of people, crawling in for the next one to say, I can't wait to see what's next. I do want to thank also our bishop staff. I know they worked very hard on this, particularly this year, coming out of some of that pandemic stuff and organizing it all. So you can see our Bishop Sue Briner and all of the other staff here. And we're just grateful for their leadership, their vision, and their hard work to sort of pull us all together and keep walking in faith. So if you see them too, you see them around the church, give them a well done, good and faithful servant. Well, peace be with you all. Might I close in prayer? Gracious God, we give you thanks for Christ in our lives, for the work of the church that you share as Christ, anointing us with your Spirit to go out and be sent and to share this good news, to go with it, to meet others who are different and yet have that commonality of that same image of God in all, that sacred space that we are called to share and to live and to walk together in faith. We ask for your blessing upon Peace Lutheran Church, upon the Southwestern Texas Synod, upon the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and upon your church throughout the world. Help us to carry out your vision of life and reconciliation as we join you and partner with you in mission, and as all people might know the good news found in Jesus. We offer this up all in his name. Amen. Thank you all. Until next time.
He went to the building meant for holy things, but it wasn't welcoming. Foreigners and eunuchs, the place rejected him, so he went home wondering. Got good news, got good news. An angel said to Philip, go to the wilderness, and there he saw a chariot. The Spirit said to join it. That's why he was sent. So he ran up listening. Got good news. Got good news. Go with it. Got good news. Good news. The scroll he was reading was Isaiah. It said justice was denied him. Starting from this scripture, he shared the good news about Jesus, witnessing. Got good news. Got good news. Go with it. Got good news. Good They came to some water there along the road. The eunuch said to Philip, what is to prevent me? He baptized him that day. They went on their way rejoicing, the Spirit still sending good news. listening with ears to hear and